There is something about highly intelligent people that most people completely misunderstand. It's Friday evening. Their phone lights up. Dinner tonight? Come out with us. Drinks after work? Party at my place. They read the message. And before they've even finished reading it, their fingers are already typing. Sorry, I can't make it tonight. I've got too much going on. Senban face down. And then something strange happens. They feel relieved. Not slightly relieved, not happy that they avoided an awkward conversation. A deep physical wave of relief moves through them, almost as if someone just lifted a heavy weight from their chest. And that feeling is the part almost nobody understands. From the outside, people see someone who constantly chooses solitude and they reach for the obvious explanations. Arrogant, cold, difficult, antisocial. They think they're better than everyone else. Sometimes even the intelligent person has already built the explanation for themselves. I just like being alone. I don't need people. I enjoy my own company. I'm happier this way. And maybe some of that is true, but sometimes there is something underneath it that is much more complicated, because for some highly intelligent people, isolation did not begin as a preference. It began as protection. And after years of repeating that protection, the person eventually forgets what they were originally protecting themselves from. They build a story around their solitude, a story so convincing that eventually they stop questioning it. Today, we're going beneath that story. We're going to explore why highly intelligent people can become deeply isolated, why solitude can feel safer than connection, and how something that begins as self-protection can slowly become a prison. And stay until the end, because the final reason is the one that can completely change the way you understand your own isolation. This pattern has been noticed for more than a century. Psychologist Lita Hollingworth became well known for her work with highly gifted children, and one of the uncomfortable realities she encountered was that exceptional intellectual ability did not automatically produce an easier social life. Sometimes it produced the opposite. A child could understand ideas years ahead of the people around them, yet still struggle to find someone who could meet them where their mind naturally lived. Later research on profoundly gifted children continued to document similar challenges, and that tells us something important. The problem isn't necessarily that intelligent people dislike people. Sometimes the problem is that they struggle to find people with whom they don't have to constantly translate themselves. Imagine speaking a language that nobody else around you understands. You can learn their language. You can become fluent. You can joke, you can work, you can make friends. You can even become extremely good at appearing completely normal. But every conversation still requires translation. You have to simplify your thoughts. You have to remove the complicated parts. You have to decide which observations are worth saying and which ones will only make people uncomfortable. You have to slow yourself down. You have to monitor your tone. You have to make sure your curiosity doesn't come across as interrogation. You have to make sure your intensity doesn't look like judgment. And eventually, socializing can begin to feel less like resting and more like performing. Psychological research on the need for cognition helps explain why people who naturally enjoy deep thinking can become dissatisfied with constant shallow interaction. And Kazimierz Dabrowski's work on overexcitabilities also explored the intense cognitive and emotional experiences sometimes found among highly gifted individuals. The point isn't that every intelligent person is lonely. That would be nonsense. The point is that when someone experiences the world with unusual depth and intensity, ordinary social interaction can sometimes feel strangely unsatisfying, and that experience often begins much earlier than adulthood. Go back far enough and you may find a child who asked questions nobody expected, a child who wanted to know why instead of simply accepting because, a child who became fascinated by subjects everyone else found boring, a child who noticed tension between adults before anyone explained what was happening, a child who said something unusually honest at the dinner table and suddenly noticed the room becoming quiet. Maybe people laughed. Maybe someone told them they were overthinking. Maybe the teacher dismissed the question. Maybe their parents said, "Why can't you just be like the other kids?" No one necessarily had to tell that child to hide. The child learned it by watching. They discovered something very early. There is a social ceiling. Stay below it and people feel comfortable. Go too far above it and suddenly you become strange, too intense, too serious, too curious. Too much, so the child adapts. They learn when to speak. They learn when to stay quiet. They learn which parts of themselves get accepted and which parts create distance. And that adaptation can follow them for decades. What once helped them survive a difficult environment can eventually become the reason they avoid environments altogether. And that brings us to the first hidden reason, the translation tax. Imagine an ordinary lunch at work. 8 people sitting around a table. Someone is talking about a television show. Someone else is discussing weekend plans. Another person is complaining about their kitchen renovation. The intelligent person is there. They're smiling. They're listening, they're making the occasional joke. From the outside, everything looks completely normal. But internally, something else is happening. They are filtering, they are editing, they are calculating. They may have an observation that connects the conversation to something much deeper, but they know saying it will change the entire direction of the conversation, so they swallow it. They have a question, they don't ask it. They have a story, they shorten it. They have an opinion, they soften it. They notice something about another person's behavior. They keep it to themselves, and they constantly monitor how they are being perceived. Am I talking too much? Did that sound arrogant? Did I make things too serious? Was that joke too dark? Do they think I'm weird? Should I say something? Should I stay quiet? To everyone else, lunch is a break. For them, lunch can become another mental shift. That is the translation tax, and it gets charged over and over again. Eventually, the brain notices the pattern. Social interaction consumes energy, solitude restores energy, and if solitude consistently feels easier, the brain naturally begins choosing it. At first, it's occasional, then it becomes a habit, then the habit becomes a lifestyle, and eventually, they don't even remember when they stopped trying. But there is another force working underneath it. The disappointment archive. Highly analytical minds are often excellent at recognizing patterns, and that ability doesn't magically disappear when the subject becomes their own relationships. Somewhere in the background, they start collecting evidence. The conversation where they tried to explain something they were genuinely excited about and received a blank stare. The moment they opened up emotionally and the other person changed the subject, the time they tried to take a conversation deeper and the other person laughed it off. The friendship where they constantly felt like they were the one doing the emotional work. The relationship where they felt understood for a few months, only to discover that the connection was mostly superficial. None of these moments has to be dramatic. That's what makes them dangerous. 1 disappointment is easy to dismiss. 2 are unfortunate. 5 become a pattern. 20 become a prediction, and eventually the mind starts making calculations. People usually don't understand me. Opening up usually ends badly. Getting close usually becomes exhausting. Why keep trying? That conclusion may not even be conscious. There is no meeting where they sit down and announce, I am now choosing permanent isolation. It happens quietly. 1 unanswered message, 1 canceled plan, 1 disappointing conversation, 1 failed relationship, 1 more night spent alone. And eventually the brain starts protecting itself before anything has even gone wrong. That is when the third reason appears, the relief trap. Remember the relief we talked about at the beginning? That feeling after canceling the dinner? That feeling matters because relief can become reinforcement. You avoid the social situation, your anxiety drops, your body relaxes, you feel safe again, and your brain learns something extremely simple: avoidance works. So the next invitation comes, you decline it, relief. Another invitation, decline. More relief. Another opportunity to meet someone, stay home, relief again. This is one of the basic mechanisms behind avoidance behavior. The brain learns that escaping discomfort produces immediate comfort, and immediate comfort is powerful, but there is a hidden cost. Social confidence is partly built through exposure and repetition. If you stop exercising a muscle, the muscle becomes weaker. Kant can work in a similar way. After months of isolation, a simple gathering can start feeling enormous. A birthday party that once would have been normal now feels exhausting. Meeting new people feels unnatural. Small talk feels unbearable. Even sending a message can feel like work, so they avoid it again. And because they avoided it, they feel relieved again. Now the loop becomes stronger. Isolation makes connection harder. Connection becoming harder makes isolation more attractive. Isolation becomes more attractive, so they isolate even more. The prison doesn't need a locked door, it only needs a comfortable room. And then something even more dangerous can happen. The behavior becomes identity. This is the fourth reason, the identity fortress. At the beginning, the story might have been, "I can't find people who understand me." That sentence contains pain, but after years of isolation, the story can quietly change. "I'm alone because nobody is on my level." Do you see the difference? The first statement sounds like loneliness, the second sounds like superiority. And superiority is easier for the ego to live with. It feels powerful, it feels controlled, it transforms rejection into choice. Instead of saying, "I'm afraid nobody will understand me," the mind says, "Nobody is worth understanding." Instead of "I'm lonely," it says, "I prefer solitude." Instead of "I'm afraid of being disappointed again," it says, "People are shallow." And the most dangerous part is that some of these statements may contain a small piece of truth. Maybe some people really are shallow. Maybe some conversations really are boring. Maybe they genuinely are more intellectually curious than most people around them. But that doesn't mean everyone is incapable of connecting with them. The mind can take a small truth and build an entire fortress around it. And once the fortress is built, there is one thing the person no longer has to risk: being wrong. As long as they don't genuinely reach out again, they never have to discover whether their belief is accurate. They can remain the misunderstood person forever. They never have to risk being rejected. They never have to risk being vulnerable. They never have to risk discovering that perhaps the problem was not that nobody could understand them. Perhaps they had simply stopped allowing anyone close enough to try. That is where intelligence itself can become an alibi. Because being intelligent gives the mind endless explanations. It can analyze every failed relationship. It can explain every social interaction. It can identify every flaw in other people. It can construct an incredibly convincing argument for why solitude is the superior choice. But there is one question it may avoid. What if I'm not protecting my peace anymore? What if I'm protecting my fear? That question is uncomfortable, because if the answer is yes, then the entire identity has to be reconsidered. The person who always said, "I don't need anyone," might have to admit that they actually wanted connection. They just stopped believing it was available. And there is another paradox hidden here. Solitude can be incredibly valuable. Silence can help you think. Being alone can help you recover. Time away from people can make you more creative, more focused, and more emotionally stable. The problem isn't solitude. The problem is when solitude becomes the only place where you feel safe, because a mind completely isolated from other minds can slowly become an echo chamber. Every thought sounds convincing when nobody challenges it. Every belief feels correct when nobody presents another perspective. Every interpretation of the world becomes harder to question. You don't sharpen a blade by never letting it touch anything. You sharpen it through friction. The same can be true of thinking. Other people challenge your assumptions. They misunderstand you sometimes. They surprise you. They disagree with you. They reveal information you never considered. They force your internal world to interact with reality. Without that friction, even a brilliant mind can become trapped inside its own conclusions. And something similar can happen emotionally. The person becomes incredibly good at understanding everyone else. They can read motives. They can analyze behavior. They can explain why people act the way they do. They can recognize insecurity in others from a mile away. They can identify manipulation. They can understand emotional patterns. But there is one person they may struggle to understand: themselves. The instrument used to measure the entire world has developed a blind spot, and that blind spot is pointed inward. They can explain loneliness intellectually while never admitting that they are lonely emotionally. They call it peace. They call it independence. They call it standards. They call it intelligence. Anything except what it might actually be: a human need for connection that has been ignored for too long. And if you've recognized yourself in this, Don't expect some magical 5-step solution. Human behavior rarely changes because someone gives us 5 perfect steps. Sometimes the first change is much smaller. It is simply noticing the story. Noticing the moment you feel relief after canceling plans. Noticing the thought that says, they wouldn't understand anyway. Noticing when solitude feels peaceful and when it feels like hiding, because there is a difference. A very important difference. Some people genuinely love solitude. They spend time alone because they are comfortable with themselves. They maintain friendships. They connect when they want to. They can enter a room and participate without feeling like they are performing. Their solitude is a choice. Other people isolate because connection feels dangerous. Their solitude is protection from the outside. The two people can look identical. Both are alone. Both may enjoy quiet evenings. Both may turn down invitations. Both may say they don't need a large social circle, but internally they are living completely different lives, and sometimes life creates a strange moment that exposes the difference. They meet someone, not necessarily a soulmate, not necessarily some dramatic movie character, just someone who somehow speaks their language. A conversation begins. It was supposed to last 10 minutes, 3 hours disappear. They make a joke without explaining it. The other person understands. They share an unusual thought. Instead of receiving a blank stare, the other person leans forward. They say something complicated. The other person doesn't ask them to simplify. And suddenly, something happens. They realize how tired they have been from translating themselves. They realize they never stopped wanting connection. They only stopped believing connection was possible, and that realization can be both beautiful and painful, because the fortress suddenly becomes visible. It was never really a home. It was scaffolding built around an old wound. But not everyone gets that moment. Some people meet someone like this and are too afraid to let them in. Others become so attached to their identity that connection itself feels like a threat. Because if you have spent 10 years telling yourself that you don't need anyone, admitting that you want someone becomes terrifying. The story and the person become fused. The trophy has been carried for so long that it has grown into the hand. And now putting it down feels like losing part of yourself. That is the cruel paradox. The same intelligence that helped them understand the world can help them construct an airtight explanation for why they should remain separate from it. They can become brilliant at defending the walls, but eventually there is a question that the walls cannot answer. Are you alone because you truly want to be, or because you are afraid of what might happen if you stop being alone? That is the question worth sitting with, because there is a profound difference between a refuge and a fortress. A refuge is somewhere you go to recover. A fortress is somewhere you hide. The walls may look exactly the same from the outside. The silence may sound exactly the same. The empty room may look exactly the same, but the person inside knows the difference. And perhaps that is the real lesson. Being highly intelligent does not make someone immune to loneliness. If anything, intelligence can sometimes make loneliness easier to rationalize. You can explain it, you can defend it, you can intellectualize it, you can turn it into an identity. But explaining a feeling is not the same thing as experiencing freedom from it. So think about your own life for a moment. When you reject an invitation, do you feel peaceful afterward? Or do you feel relieved because you escaped something? When you say, I don't need people, is that confidence? Or is it armor? When you say, nobody understands me, have you genuinely given anyone the chance? And when you spend another night alone, are you choosing solitude? Or has solitude slowly started choosing you? Maybe the answer will be uncomfortable. Good, sometimes discomfort is the first sign that a question has finally reached somewhere important. Because recognizing the wall is different from being trapped behind it. And if any part of this sounded painfully familiar, remember this. You are not strange for wanting solitude. You are not weak for wanting connection. And you are not less intelligent because you need other people. A brilliant mind still needs friction. A strong person still needs intimacy. An independent person can still need someone. And sometimes the strongest thing an intelligent person can do is stop proving that they can survive alone. So tell me in the comments, which one of these 4 patterns felt most familiar to you? The translation tax? the disappointment archive, the relief trap, or the identity fortress. And if you know someone who always says no to the invitation, someone everyone has quietly stopped inviting because they assume they prefer being alone, share this video with them. They may never admit they needed to hear it. But sometimes the person who looks like they want to be left alone is the person who has simply forgotten what it feels like to be understood. If this video made you think differently about yourself or someone you know, hit like, subscribe, and stay with us as we continue exploring the hidden psychology behind the things people rarely say out loud. Because sometimes the darkest corners of the mind aren't the places where nothing exists. They're the places where something important has been hidden for so long that we've forgotten it was there. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.